The great outdoors is a beautiful, sprawling death trap, patiently waiting for an idiot to spring it. While nature has a million ways to kill you, it takes a special kind of human genius to invent a new one. This video is your official field guide to the absolute worst survival instincts ever recorded. Pay attention. This might be the most important safety lesson you ever get. 1. Our first cautionary tale takes us deep into the waterlogged bowels of Florida, a state that has practically patented the concept of beautiful places that want to kill you. Here, amidst the sweltering heat and questionable life choices, we meet a man we'll call Greg. Greg was what you'd call a gear first, questions later kind of guy. He was a devout believer in the sacred text of the American Express statement, convinced that true expertise wasn't earned through tedious practice, but purchased with a high enough credit limit. His latest acquisition, the crown jewel of his collection of barely used equipment, was a $15,000 closed-circuit rebreather. For the uninitiated, let's do a quick science drop. Standard scuba gear is beautifully simple. It's a can of air you breathe from and you blow bubbles. A rebreather, however, is a silent, bubble-free life support system strapped to your back. It recycles the air you exhale, chemically scrubbing out the carbon dioxide and using a computer to inject the perfect, life-sustaining kiss of oxygen back into the loop. It's the underwater equivalent of a stealth bomber. The catch? The computer that keeps you alive must be told exactly what to do. The instruction manual is thicker than a phone book and filled with checklists that have zero room for error. Make one tiny mistake in the setup, and the machine will quietly, efficiently, and without any warning whatsoever begin feeding you the wrong mixture of gas until you just fall asleep. Greg, of course, viewed the 300-page manual as a personal affront to his natural genius. He'd learned everything he needed to know from a 12-minute YouTube tutorial titled Rebreather Basics for Bros, and felt he had absorbed the material. He planned a solo cave dive because, naturally, other divers with their loud, primitive bubble machines would just ruin the vibe and cramp his style. On that fateful morning, as he geared up, he performed the pre-dive checklist with the attention to detail of a teenager cleaning their room. He skipped sensor calibrations, ignored pressure checks, and was probably more focused on getting the perfect GoPro angle than on the delicate chemical balance that was about to become responsible for his continued existence. He slipped into the crystal-clear water and descended into the cave's mouth, feeling less like a diver and more like an aquatic secret agent. The silence was intoxicating. He was one with the abyss. The only problem was that the sophisticated machine on his back was now following his flawed instructions with cold, digital precision. He had made an almost imperceptible error in setting his oxygen levels. So, as he glided deeper into the labyrinth, the rebreather began to slowly, gently, decrease the percentage of oxygen in his breathing loop. This isn't like running out of air. There's no panic, no choking sensation. It's the most peaceful assassination imaginable. He probably felt a growing sense of calm, a warm, fuzzy euphoria he mistook for enlightenment. This is true Zen, he might have thought, as his brain cells began to starve. As he squeezed through one last narrow passage, he simply became tired. He decided to rest for just a moment, and then, with no struggle, no final thought, he fell into a deep, dreamless sleep from which he would never wake up. When the recovery team found him a day later, he looked serene, like a man at peace, wedged into a crevice 70 feet below the surface. They reported his multi-thousand-dollar gear was working perfectly. It was doing exactly what its user had told it to do. Keep him underwater, forever. 2. There is a law of the universe that states the more photogenic a location is, the more enthusiastically it wants to murder you. And nowhere is this law more brutally enforced than in Iceland, a country basically designed by a rogue deity who loved both stunning beauty and catastrophic violence. This brings us to Chloe, a budding social media influencer who operated under the deeply held belief that a life unfilmed was a life unlived. For her, a warning sign wasn't a command. It was a suggestion, a mere obstacle between her and the kind of content that would get her a sponsorship deal for a terrible-tasting energy drink. Her pilgrimage brought her to a glacial lagoon, a place so achingly beautiful it looks like a CGI rendering. It's a lake filled with giant sapphire blue icebergs that have snapped off a nearby glacier. Now, for anyone who didn't pay attention in science class, a quick lesson in Glaciers 101. A glacier is not a static ice cube. It is a river of frozen water, weighing billions of tons, constantly moving, cracking, and collapsing under its own mind-boggling weight. The beautiful ice caves that form at its edge are not stable structures. They are the equivalent of a building in the middle of a 5-year-long demolition. They are, to put it mildly, nature's most beautiful death traps. The area was surrounded by signs in 6 different languages, all basically screaming, "Stay back, this thing is coming down." Chloe, however, saw these signs not as warnings, but as props to lend her adventure an air of edgy authenticity. She breezily hopped the safety rope, blew a kiss to the horrified tourists, and ventured out onto the unstable ice field. She found her target, a cavern of ice so blue and so perfect it looked like a cathedral carved from a gemstone. This was it. This was the shot that would elevate her from micro-influencer to full-blown inspirational brand ambassador. She set up her phone on a tripod, struck a pose, and began her sacred ritual. The duck face, the fake contemplative stare into the middle distance, a little twirl for a boomerang. With every step, with every giggle, with every "oh my god, you guys, it's so amazing" shouted for her eventual voiceover, she was sending tiny shockwaves through the hyper-stressed, fragile structure. At one point, a deep, guttural crack echoed from deep within the ice. She likely just smiled, thinking, "Awesome, natural sound effects." She was so mesmerized by the reflection of herself in her phone's screen that she completely missed the fact that the entire ceiling was a single, fractured pane of ice, weighing more than a dozen school buses. The end was not a dramatic, slow-motion crumbling. It was an instant, violent erasure. 1 second, she was framing the perfect selfie. The next, the entire roof of the cave imploded with a sound like the world tearing in half, compacting thousands of tons of ice into a solid, impenetrable mass. There was no time to scream. There was no time for a final thought. She was simply and immediately transformed from a person into a fossil. Rescue teams later found her tripod sitting just outside the new wall of crushed ice. The phone was still recording. The final video is a testament to her dedication. 20 seconds of flawless posing, followed by a single, deafening crack, and then a minute of the horrifying, grinding sound of her own tomb sealing itself forever. She had been instantly buried under 100 feet of ice, achieving a form of immortality she never intended. 3. There's a special breed of human who views any official warning as a direct challenge to their superior intellect and rugged individualism. Meet Dave. Dave was the kind of guy who owned a massive pickup truck that had never seen a dirt road, wore wraparound sunglasses indoors, and believed that all firefighters were just standing around waiting for a photo op. So, on a blistering hot day in the California hills, when a terrifying wildfire began to rage out of control, Dave saw not a reason to evacuate, but an opportunity. As panicked residents clogged the highways fleeing for their lives, Dave was the lone wolf, the maverick, driving towards the smoke. He was a self-appointed citizen journalist on a mission to get the real story, which to him meant filming the pretty flames while drinking a beer and complaining about the government. Now, a crucial PSA about how wildfires actually work. They are not campfires. They are living, breathing monsters that create their own weather. They generate winds that can throw burning embers like little fire goblins miles ahead of the main blaze, starting new fires in the most inconvenient places possible, like, for example, directly on top of your only escape route. Dave, having received his PhD in pyrodynamics from the University of Stubborn Stupidity, knew better. He swerved around a large road closed sign, probably muttering about the nanny state, and found himself a perfect scenic overlook on a high, isolated ridge. The view was, admittedly, spectacular, a biblical wall of fire consuming the landscape. He cracked a cold one, propped his phone on his dashboard, and went live. "See, folks," he probably slurred to his 42 followers, "the fake news media is making this look so bad. It's just a little orange glow. I'm perfectly safe up here." For a while, his arrogance seemed justified. He was the rugged truth-teller, broadcasting from the heart of the action. He probably noticed a few lazy wisps of smoke rising from the canyon behind him, the very canyon containing the road he used to get there. He surely dismissed it. Just some residual smoke, he'd think, taking another swig. But the fire, a patient and cunning predator, had used his distraction to send one of its ember paratroopers across the canyon. The lazy wisp became a plume, then a column, then a raging inferno. His only way out was now a furnace door. The smug grin on his face likely evaporated as he saw the wall of flames blocking his exit. Panic, cold and sharp, finally pierced his bubble of self-importance. He threw the truck into reverse, but it was useless. The fire wasn't just on the road, it was the road. It surged up the hillside towards him with the speed and roar of a jet engine. His sanctuary, his rugged pickup truck, instantly became a convection oven. The tires exploded, the glass cracked and spiderwebbed from the heat. The air itself turned to poison. His final moments were a frantic, futile dance of terror inside a steel coffin as the pretty orange glow he had come to mock reached in and claimed him. When a grim-faced fire crew found the molten wreck days later, they also found his phone. The last recorded seconds of his live stream were a masterpiece of irony. The distorted, screaming face of a man, his eyes wide with a terror he finally understood, illuminated by the beautiful, destructive, and very, very real fire that was about to make him the star of his own final hot take. 4. Some people see a danger sign and think, okay, noted, I'll be careful. Others see it as a personal attack, a direct challenge from the universe to prove just how little the rules apply to them. Our next protagonist, a man we'll call Barry, belonged firmly in the second category. Barry was on a spiritual journey at a famous geothermal park, a place where the Earth's molten guts are so close to the surface that the ground literally boils. This landscape is a psychedelic wonderland of bubbling mud pots, steaming fumaroles, and pools of water colored in shades of turquoise and orange so vivid they look radioactive. It's also, and this is the important part, a non-stop 24/7 chemistry experiment from hell. The place is plastered with warning signs. We're talking big, friendly, cartoon skull and crossbones signs that say things like, danger, ground is unstable and may collapse, and warning, pools contain boiling, highly acidic water. These signs are not subtle suggestions. They are the planet's way of screaming, I will literally dissolve you, do not step here. Barry, a man whose spiritual journey involved more crystals than common sense, saw these warnings and apparently translated them in his mind to free, all-natural, organic spa treatment ahead. He was convinced that all this geothermal activity was just nature's way of offering a complimentary wellness experience, and that the government, in its infinite buzzkill capacity, was trying to keep the good stuff all to itself. He was particularly drawn to a stunningly beautiful, steaming pool of iridescent blue water. It looked like the most inviting hot tub in the universe. It was also, according to the very large sign next to it, a superheated cauldron of sulfuric acid with a pH level roughly equivalent to battery fluid. Barry, a self-proclaimed energy healer, decided he could feel the positive vibes coming off the pool and that the sign was just fear-mongering. He decided he would bless himself with these sacred waters. Not by jumping in, of course, he wasn't a total lunatic. He'd just dip his foot in, a little baptism to cleanse his aura or whatever. He stepped over the flimsy wooden railing, his Birkenstocks crunching on the fragile mineral crust surrounding the pool. This crust, for the record, is a paper-thin layer of cooled minerals sitting on top of a slurry of boiling mud and acid. It has the structural integrity of a meringue cookie. His friend, who had at least a single functioning brain cell, begged him to come back. Barry just laughed. Dude, relax, it's all about intention. The Earth knows I mean it no harm. He took another step, getting right to the edge, and leaned over to dip his toes in. It was at that moment the Earth decided to respond to his intentions with a lesson in geology. The fragile crust under his feet didn't just crack, it vaporized. It gave way with a sickening hiss, and Barry plunged straight into the boiling acidic brew. The shock wasn't just of the heat, which was well over 200 degrees Fahrenheit, but of the acid itself. It began to dissolve him on contact. His screams were horrifying but mercifully short. By the time the park rangers arrived, Summoned by his terrified friend, there was nothing to rescue. All they found was a pair of floating, partially dissolved sandals. Barry had achieved the ultimate state of oneness with nature he was seeking. He had become a dissolved solid, a fleeting chemical anomaly in a pool of earthly fury, a cautionary tale that proves sometimes the universe isn't sending you good vibes. It's sending you a very, very clear warning label. 5. There exists a magical place in the human mind where boundless confidence and a complete lack of engineering knowledge meet. It's a place where duct tape is a structural component. Eyeballing it is a valid form of measurement, and the laws of physics are merely suggestions. Welcome to the workshop of Chad and Kevin, two backyard geniuses who decided that paying for a professionally operated zipline experience was for suckers. Why spend $100 when you could build your own for $50, using parts from the local hardware store and a healthy dose of unwarranted optimism? Their grand project was to span a 200-foot-deep rocky ravine behind Chad's house. It was the perfect setting for a glorious, adrenaline-fueled ride, or alternatively, a gruesome, high-velocity impact. The plan was simple. They bought a quarter-inch steel cable, a bunch of U-clamps, and a pulley that was probably designed for a clothesline. For their anchor points, the most critical part of the entire contraption, they chose 2 trees. The starting point was a sturdy, living oak. The destination tree, however, was a tall, majestic-looking pine that had one minor, insignificant flaw. It had been visibly dead for about a decade. It was less of a tree and more of a tall wooden corpse, just waiting for a stiff breeze to turn it into firewood. Chad, the lead engineer of this operation, dismissed Kevin's concerns with a confident wave. "Dude, it's fine," he probably said. "It's a pine tree. They're like super strong." They secured the cable, tightening the clamps with a wrench and a grunt, a method that is famously less effective than using a proper torque wrench. The zipline was complete. It was a monument to ambition, a testament to the human spirit, and a catastrophic failure waiting to happen. Chad, being the visionary, declared he would take the inaugural ride. He strapped on a climbing harness that he'd probably been using as a belt, clipped his clothesline pulley to the cable, and gave a thumbs up to Kevin, who was filming for their future YouTube channel, Genius or Gone. "Ready to fly," Chad yelled, and with a running start, he leaped from the platform. For about 3 glorious seconds, the plan worked. He was soaring, a magnificent, horizontally traveling idiot, high above the rocky floor of the ravine. The wind was in his hair. The adrenaline was pumping. He was the master of his own destiny. But destiny, in this case, was being held in place by the rotting wood of a dead tree. The moment his full, momentum-fueled weight hit the midway point of the cable, the point of maximum tension, the dead pine tree finally gave up the ghost. It didn't just snap. It exploded at the base in a shower of rotten wood and termites. The anchor point was gone. Now, this is where the fun with physics begins. The cable, no longer anchored at both ends, was still attached to the very much alive oak tree on the starting side. Chad and his pulley were still attached to the cable. This transformed his glorious zipline into a terrifying 300-foot-long pendulum. He swung downwards in a massive, sickening arc, gaining speed with every foot of descent. His triumphant flight became a high-speed, gravity-powered trip directly into the jagged, unforgiving rock face of the cliff he had just launched from. The impact was, to put it mildly, definitive. Kevin, still filming, captured the whole thing. The triumphant launch, the glorious flight, the sharp crack of the tree giving way, and the final, brutal, percussive thud. Chad had set out to conquer the ravine, and in a way, he did. He became a permanent, abstract red smear on its rock wall, a final, modern art installation titled Hubris and the Pendulum. 6. Some people treat the outdoors like a well-stocked supermarket, believing every plant is either a delicious snack or a potent herbal remedy just waiting to be discovered. Our next hero, a hiking enthusiast we'll name Julian, was one of these people. Julian wasn't just a hiker, he was a self-proclaimed nature expert, a title he had bestowed upon himself after watching 3 seasons of a survival show and successfully identifying poison ivy once. He was the kind of guy who would confidently point at a random berry and declare it a superfood. much to the terror of anyone hiking with him. On a hot summer afternoon, Julian was leading a small group through a dense forest trail. After a few miles, he decided the designated path was inefficient and for tourists. True experts, he announced, make their own trails. He spotted what looked like a shortcut through a thick, lush patch of greenery. His less confident companions pointed out that the plants were unfamiliar and that maybe, just maybe, they should stick to the marked trail. Julian scoffed. "Relax," he said, with the unshakable confidence of the truly ignorant. "They're just weeds. A little bushwhacking never hurt anyone." With that, he plunged into the dense thicket, his bare arms and legs brushing against the tall, thick-stemmed plants with their large, innocent-looking white flowers. He felt a little sap on his skin, but paid it no mind. The plant he was so confidently wading through was giant hogweed. For those unfamiliar with nature's little chemical warfare agents, giant hogweed is not just a weed. It's a botanical nightmare. Its sap contains a phototoxic compound, which is a fancy way of saying it's a chemical that does absolutely nothing until it's exposed to sunlight. When UV rays hit the sap, it triggers a chemical reaction that destroys skin cells, causing horrific third-degree burns, massive, weeping blisters, and permanent scarring. It's basically the vampire of the plant world. Julian emerged from the shortcut triumphant, covered in scratches and a thin, invisible film of sap. "See? Told you it was fine," he boasted. For the next few hours, everything was indeed fine. But as the afternoon sun beat down, the chemical time bomb on his skin began to detonate. It started with a mild itching, which he dismissed as bug bites. Then came the redness. Then the burning. Within hours, his arms and legs erupted in giant, grotesque blisters, some the size of golf balls. The pain was excruciating, a searing chemical fire that felt like he was being cooked from the inside out. His friends, horrified, called for an emergency evacuation. But by the time the rescue team reached him, the damage was done. The massive burns covered over 60% of his body. At the hospital, doctors could do little to stop the damage. The hogweed's poison had not only destroyed his skin, but it also opened the door for a massive, aggressive bacterial infection. His body, overwhelmed by the trauma and the raging sepsis, began to shut down. Julian, the man who thought he knew nature, died 3 days later in a hospital bed, a victim of a simple weed and a fatal dose of arrogance. He had set out to prove he was a master of the wilderness, and ended up providing a horrifying textbook example of why you should always, always stay on the path. 7. Adrenaline junkies are a special breed. They look at a situation that would make any normal person's survival instinct scream, "Run away," and instead think, "I bet I could ride that." Our next subject, a kayaker named Kyle, was the undisputed chairman, CEO, and sole employee of this particular school of thought. Kyle lived for the gram, and his feed was a curated collection of near misses and questionable decisions, all set to generic EDM music. His philosophy was that if you didn't almost die, it wasn't worth filming. One sunny afternoon, Kyle was kayaking near the base of a massive hydroelectric dam. Now, a quick lesson in civil engineering for anyone whose brain is currently being marinated in energy drinks. A dam is basically a giant concrete plug holding back a lake the size of a small country. When they need to release water, they don't just turn on a faucet. They open a spillway, a gate that unleashes a biblical torrent of water with enough force to power a city or, alternatively, turn a human being into a fine red mist. This process is not a secret. It's preceded by a series of warnings that are impossible to ignore. Loud, blaring sirens, flashing strobe lights, and probably a booming, godlike voice over a loudspeaker saying, "Get out of the water, you moron!" As Kyle paddled, this exact sequence of events began. The sirens wailed, the lights flashed. Any sane creature, fish, birds, even particularly intelligent algae, began to flee the area. But Kyle? Kyle saw this not as a death warrant, but as a personal invitation. The universe had just served him up the ultimate content opportunity on a silver platter. As the colossal spillway gate began to open, the water below started to churn. A massive, swirling hydraulic, a vortex of unimaginable power, began to form at the base of the dam. It was a liquid blender, a horizontal waterfall, a liquid death machine. And Kyle, paddling his tiny plastic boat, saw this aquatic nightmare and thought, "Challenge accepted." He turned his GoPro on, gave a triumphant whoop to the horrified onlookers on the shore, and started paddling towards the chaos. He was going to ride the killer whirlpool. He was going to become a legend. For a few seconds, he was on the edge of the vortex, his little kayak bucking like a rodeo bull. He was probably having the time of his life, imagining the slow-motion edits and the flood of likes. But a hydraulic doesn't play games. One moment he was on the edge. The next, the current grabbed his boat with the force of a giant, invisible hand and yanked him in. His kayak was sucked into the churning, aerated water and disappeared instantly. Now, the truly horrifying thing about a dam hydraulic, or a keeper hole, is that it doesn't just pull you under. It holds you there. The recirculating current pins you against the dam face in a violent, inescapable washing machine cycle, recycling you over and over in the same spot, just a few feet below the surface. There is no swimming out of it. There is no escape. Kyle, the extreme sports enthusiast, was held in a liquid cage, just out of sight, until his lungs filled with water and his quest for legendary status came to a very quiet, very final end. His boat, shattered into a dozen pieces, popped up downstream a few minutes later. His body, however, remained in the keeper, a permanent silent offering to the gods of energy production and extreme stupidity. 8. There is a fine line between being a confident expert and being an arrogant amateur, and that line is often drawn in the dirt of a forest floor, right next to a mushroom that will either make a delicious omelet or liquefy your internal organs. Meet Arthur, a man who, after reading a single, brightly colored book titled Mushroom Foraging for Dummies, had declared himself a master mycologist. Arthur was a foodie, the kind of guy who described flavors using words like terroir and umami, and believed that anything store-bought was fundamentally peasant food. True culinary genius, he believed, came from living off the land, a phrase he used to describe his one-hour hikes in the well-manicured woods behind his suburban home. He scoffed at the book's endless warnings about look-alike species and its primary advice, which was essentially, if you aren't 1000% sure, don't eat it. To Arthur, this was just legal boilerplate for the weak-willed. His superior intellect, he was sure, could easily distinguish friend from foe. On a damp autumn morning, he set out with a wicker basket and a smug sense of purpose. After an hour of searching, he struck what he thought was gold. A beautiful patch of harmless-looking, whitish mushrooms. To a true expert, the warning signs would have been as subtle and as deadly as a whisper of cyanide. The faint greenish tint to the cap, the white gills, and most critically, the small, cup-like sac at the base of the stem, often hidden by dirt. These are the calling cards of Amanita phalloides, better known by its much more descriptive name, the death cap. But Arthur, a mere tourist in the world of mycology, saw them and his brain, cross-referencing a single picture from his book, screamed, "Paddy straw mushrooms." He triumphantly harvested the entire deadly patch, completely oblivious to the fact he was gathering handfuls of slow-acting, organ-liquefying poison. The death cap is the undisputed king of things you can accidentally eat that will make you wish you hadn't. Its toxin, amatoxin, is a silent, patient killer. It doesn't cause immediate symptoms. Instead, it quietly gets to work assassinating your liver and kidney cells, one by one. By the time you start to feel sick, a day or two later, you are already, for all intents and purposes, a dead man walking. Arthur returned home, a conquering hero with his basket of death. He cooked up a magnificent savory stir-fry, using every last one of his hard-won prizes. He probably savored every bite, commenting on the earthy notes and the superior flavor of wild-foraged food. The first day, he felt fine. Victorious, even. But it was on the third day that the death cap played its trump card. After a brief period of feeling better, a cruel trick the toxin plays called the false recovery, his body began to completely and catastrophically shut down. His skin turned yellow. His organs failed. He died in a hospital bed a week after his gourmet meal, in excruciating pain, a victim of a culinary adventure that went horribly, fatally wrong. He had gambled his life on his own expertise, and nature had called his bluff in the most agonizing way imaginable. 9. The desert is a master of deception. It can look like the most serene, peaceful, and unchanging place on Earth. But that tranquility is a mask, hiding an environment of brutal extremes where a calm, sunny day can turn into a life-or-death struggle in a matter of minutes. This brings us to a group of 4 hikers on a weekend trip to a beautiful slot canyon in the American Southwest. Their leader, Mark, was the "I've been camping twice, so I'm basically Bear Grylls" type. He had all the gear, but none of the experience. Slot canyons are nature's sculptures, narrow, deep gorges carved by millennia of rushing water. They are stunningly beautiful, and also by their very nature, perfect funnels for flash floods. The group checked the weather forecast before they left. The forecast for their immediate area was clear and sunny. Mark saw this and declared victory. What he failed to do was check the forecast for the entire watershed, the massive area of land, sometimes hundreds of square miles, that drains into that one narrow canyon. 50 miles away, unseen and unheard, a massive thunderstorm was dumping biblical amounts of rain onto the high desert plateau. All of that water was now looking for the path of least resistance to lower ground. That path was the very canyon they were setting up camp in. They chose a beautiful spot deep in the canyon, a sandy clearing surrounded by towering red rock walls. It was picturesque, private, and the single worst place they could possibly be. As they settled in for the night, they might have noticed the air becoming strangely humid, or a faint, distant rumble that sounded nothing like thunder. They probably ignored it. The first sign of real trouble was a small trickle of muddy water snaking its way down the dry riverbed. Then another. Within minutes, the trickle became a stream. And then they heard it. A deep, terrifying roar from up canyon. It wasn't the sound of water. It was the sound of a freight train, a grinding, rumbling roar of a moving wall of liquid, carrying with it boulders, trees, and all the debris of the desert. There was no time to think, no time to climb. The flash flood arrived not as a rising tide, but as a 10-foot-tall, churning brown wave of pure, unstoppable power. It filled the canyon from wall to wall, a liquid bulldozer moving at 30 miles per hour. The hikers were simply erased. They were swept up in the violent torrent, slammed against the canyon walls, and carried for miles in a maelstrom of water and rock. Rescue teams found their shredded gear and one of their bodies 10 miles downstream a day later. The others were never found, likely buried under tons of new sediment. They had been killed by a storm they never even saw, a fatal reminder that in the desert, what you can't see is often the very thing that will kill you. They went looking for a peaceful escape and found a terrifying, permanent one, all because their leader had mistaken a lack of clouds for a lack of danger. 10. Our final tale of outdoor overconfidence takes us to the pristine, beautiful, and utterly indifferent backcountry of the Rocky Mountains. Here, we find a lone snowboarder named Brody, an aspiring filmmaker who believed that spectacular footage was worth more than, say, living to an old age. Brody's goal for the day was to capture a truly epic avalanche video. He had his eye on a massive, unstable-looking snow cornice on a distant mountain ridge. A cornice is an overhanging ledge of snow, basically a snowy diving board just waiting to snap, and this one was a monster. Brody knew that with the sun warming the snow, it was primed to collapse. His plan was to set up his camera on what he determined was a safe, opposing ridge, get his shot, and become a viral sensation. The key phrase here is, what he determined was safe. Brody's method for avalanche safety assessment was less about snowpack analysis and more about vibes. He found a perfect, wide-open slope with a great view of his target. He was so focused, so laser-fixated on the danger over there, that he completely failed to assess the danger directly under his own feet. He was so busy looking through his camera's viewfinder, framing the shot of the distant, menacing cornice, that he ignored the subtle signs all around him. The faint, whumping sound as the snow settled under his weight. The small cracks shooting out from his snowboard. He was standing on what's known as a wind slab, a a thick, brittle layer of snow deposited by the wind on top of a weak, unstable layer. It is, in essence, a giant, snowy mousetrap, and he was the mouse dancing on the trigger. He spent several minutes getting his camera set up just right, stomping around to build a stable platform for his tripod. It was this final act of preparation, the simple vibration of him moving around, that provided the final, fatal nudge. But the avalanche didn't come from the distant ridge he was filming. It came from directly beneath him. With a sound like a thunderclap, the entire slope he was standing on fractured. The ground beneath his feet simply dropped away, shattering into a million pieces and becoming a roaring, churning river of snow moving at 80 miles per hour. He was instantly caught, tumbled, and pulled under. In the horrifying chaos of an avalanche, you are not swimming. You are a ragdoll in a concrete mixer filled with ice. He was pulled down, dragged over rocks, and slammed into trees. When the snow finally came to a stop at the bottom of the valley, he was buried under 15 feet of snow as dense and hard as concrete. Rescuers, alerted by his emergency beacon, found his body 2 days later. And in a final, chilling twist of irony, they also recovered his camera. It was still pointed at the distant, perfectly safe mountain ridge, its cornice still intact, basking in the afternoon sun. He had died waiting for a monster to appear on the horizon, never realizing that the real monster was right under his feet the entire time. So forget who was the dumbest for a second. Let's be honest. Which one of these situations do you secretly think you could have survived, and what's your foolproof plan? Drop your brilliant strategy in the comments below. And if you want to keep receiving these critical safety bulletins that could save your life, you know what to do with those like and subscribe buttons.